Trading ruined my life for 4 years. The first two were probably the version you would expect. I could not become profitable. And when you spend enough time trying to make trading work, it stops feeling like one thing you are working on. It starts sitting behind everything else in your life. I could be doing something completely unrelated and still thinking about the last trade. Why did that setup lose? Was the strategy actually good enough? Then another trade appeared and suddenly its result felt like it might answer everything. If it won, maybe I was finally getting closer. If it lost, I was back to questioning the strategy. So there was never any real closure. A winning gave me hope for a few days. A loser made me feel like I had just wasted another month. And I kept believing the next adjustment would finally fix it. Maybe the entry needed to be more precise. Maybe I needed one more confirmation. So I changed something, tested it for a while, then ended up with other version I still could not trust. This went on for around 2 years. And during those 2 years, trading constantly made me feel like my life was about to start. Once I become profitable, I can finally relax. Once I start making money, all of this time will finally make sense. So every month without progress felt heavier than the one before it. I was watching the future I had built around trading move further away. And quitting did not feel like a real option either. During those 2 years, I genuinely believed profitability would solve all of it. Then, after around 2 years, I finally became profitable. The thing I had been waiting for actually happened, and somehow trading still did not give my life back. After becoming profitable, I expected the pressure to disappear. The strategy worked, and I could finally make money from it, but I still wanted to be there when every setup appeared. And once I entered the trade, the position followed me everywhere. I remember spending time with my family while I had the trade open. Physically, I was there with them. Mentally, I was somewhere between the entry and the stop loss. I would check my charts, put my phone away, then start thinking about checking it again. Am I in a profit now? Did I even take the right setup? And even when I did not look, the decision itself became stressful. So I was not really relaxing either. If the trade was going well, I started thinking about protecting the profit. If I had stopped out, my mood changed immediately. The people around me had nothing to do with the trade, but suddenly I was quieter and very present. And by this point, I had already been trading for years. I had been full-time for around a year. This was not some temporary phase while I learned the basics. This had become the way my life worked. At some point, while I was with my family but mentally still staring at the chart, I decided this had to change. Making money from trading was pointless if I could never leave trading long enough to live. The first 2 years, trading controlled me because I could not make it work. The next 2, it controlled me because I was terrified of damaging the thing that finally did. So for a long time, I treated it like a psychology problem. I thought I was too attached to the outcome, too afraid of losing. So I started reading books about psychology. I tried to understand why I could know exactly what I should do and still feel completely different once real money was involved. Intellectually, most of it made sense. Losses are part of the distribution, and one setup tells you almost nothing about whether a strategy works. I already knew that. But then the next trade opened, and the same question came back. Should I move the stop? Should I close it before the profit disappears? I could answer those questions perfectly when there was no positions open. Once I was inside the trade, the answer no longer felt as obvious. So I tried to become more disciplined. I would tell myself that this time I will place the trade and walk away. Sometimes I managed to do it for a while. Then I checked once. And after checking once, it became much harder to not check again. Because now I had seen where price was and how close it was to the stop. From that point, the trade was back inside my head. Even when I left the charts, I was still managing the positions mentally. What if it comes back? What if this setup is slightly different from the ones in the backtest? None of that felt irrational while it was happening. Every thought sounded like risk management. I thought I was protecting the trade. But every open position gave me another chance to question a decision I had already made. And I kept treating each one like a new psychological test. Can I trust this strategy this time? Can I finally leave the trade alone? Sometimes, most of the times, the answer was yes. Then the next trade came and the pressure felt different. The entire argument started again. And after hundreds of trades, that became insanely exhausting. I could explain exactly why I was checking the chart. And still feel the need to check it again 10 minutes later. So I started changing the way I executed. I began using alerts instead of sitting at the chart waiting for a setup. My strategy allowed it, so I placed limit orders in advance. Before a trade opened, the stop and target were already defined. The strategy was still not fully automatic. I still analyzed the setup and decided whether it matched what I had tested. But once I entered, the risk and the exit had already been decided. Every decision I left open became something I could question once money started moving. So I started making those decisions before the pressure appeared. At first, this felt uncomfortable. I was used to being involved. Watching the chart made me feel like I was protecting the position. What if something changed? What if I needed to react? But most of the time, there was nothing useful to do. The stop already defined where the trade was wrong, and the target defined where the profit would be taken. Me sitting there did not improve either decision. It only gave me opportunities to question. So the system slowly became at least half automated. I still chose the setups, but once I had done my part, the rest no longer required my constant presence. And for the first time, I was no longer negotiating the trade the entire time it was open. The important decisions had already been made before the pressure appeared. The strange part is that it did not make me feel better. I could place a trade, walk away, and still feel the urge to check it. My brain would start producing reasons, and because I had spent years reacting to that feeling, doing nothing felt almost impossible. But now, most of the useful decisions were already finished. There was nothing new on the chart that required me to sit there for hours. So the discomfort appeared, and sometimes I left it unanswered. I would feel the urge to open the chart, but I would wait a little longer. Sometimes I still checked. But instead of watching every candle until the trade closed, I started creating more distance. My presence would not have changed the result. Checking the chart gave me temporary relief. For a moment, I knew exactly what was happening. But then price moved again, and I needed another check. Every time I responded to stress, I was teaching myself that an open trade really did require constant attention. The half-automated system interrupted that loop. The stress could not appear without immediately turning into an action. Each new trade gave me another repetition, and after enough repetitions, the urge slowly became weaker. That was what the books could not do for me on their own. Reading about trading psychology made sense while I was gone, but the part of me that panicked during a trade was not learning anything while I was still sitting on a sofa reading about psychology. It learned while real money was moving. I felt the discomfort and still left the trade alone. Eventually, an open position stopped feeling like something that had to stay active in my mind. It became a process running in the background. I could spend time with my family without half of my attention sitting on the chart. If a trade stopped out, I found out later. It did not need to destroy my mood for hours before finally reaching the stop. And when there was no setup, I was no longer watching the market just in case something appeared. The alert would tell me. For the first time in years, trading had clear boundaries. It took me 2 years to become profitable. Then another 2 years to understand that profitability alone was never going to give me freedom. Freedom also meant being able to close the chart without carrying the trade into every other part of my day. So I had already been profitable for almost 2 years when trading finally stopped ruining my life. Not when I made my first consistent profit. When I built a system that no longer needed my constant presence.